the sport of arm wrestling is. You may think that the first modern form of arm wrestling originated in 1952, when the first professionally organized arm wrestling matches took place. You might tend to think of it as some lumberjack competition in the early 1800s, but actually the most modern form of arm wrestling we've seen, that's as old as we've seen it, was in 18th century Japan, where the sport was originated as an idea to test the strength of sword fighters as a way of seeing if they'd be able to overpower another sword fighter if their swords became locked together. So then, for how old and widespread the sport of arm wrestling is, it'd be pretty unlikely for someone to have lived without ever participated in an arm wrestling match. And so, then, today, I will be discussing the most common injuries in arm wrestling, how to prevent them, as well as the two most common arm wrestling techniques. And then I'll also be demonstrating and explaining the most optimal training for those techniques. So, just like any sport, the first and foremost topic to discuss is safety and safe form. So, the biggest real serious injury that can occur with arm wrestling is a spiral fracture of the humerus. So here I have an x-ray of what that looks like. I just pulled this off the internet. As you can see, the bone is torqued so hard that it splits lengthwise in a spiral manner. Now that's a fairly serious injury, and that's not good. It's really, really bad. Not only just for the sport, but also for everyday life. That is horrible, and it takes a long time to heal. The main way to prevent against that would be to limit the amount of torque going through your humerus. So then, in order to show this, so you see this right now would be bad, because at this angle, any pressure I apply through his hand is going to cause a lot of torque in his humerus. In order to reduce that, he'll bring his shoulder close to his hand and turn inward toward the table to then pull with his bicep and drop his body. By then rotating the angle and pulling, you can make it more of a compression and tension force as opposed to a torque, which is far safer for human bones, and bones are far more built for that direction of force. Another big problems that can occur with arm wrestling as in terms of injuries is tears of tendons or ligaments. The best way to prevent against those is just to keep a watch on not only the position of your arm, but also how your joints feel. If they start feeling weird or awkward, or if it feels like something's being twisted that shouldn't be twisted, try to reposition yourself. If you can't reposition yourself to a safe position to where it doesn't feel as awkward, then just accept the loss. It is not worth getting injured. So now that we know what safe form looks like as opposed to risky or dangerous form, we can then work on other techniques. There are two of these more common techniques. They are the hook and the top roll. So then, with the hook, it is the simpler of the two. I will demonstrate what it looks like here. So with it, the main thing that's changed is that the wrist is twisted inward, hence the name of a hook. Then you turn your body so that you pull entirely with your bicep and drop to then pull and lever their arm down. The advantages of the hook are that it gives you direct control over the flow of the arm wrestle and also puts you into a very mechanically advantageous position. The other one that I mentioned, the top roll, is then moving the wrist but in the opposite direction of the hook. So with this, you actually turn your wrist outward and press down. As you can see, my opponent's wrist is now bent completely backward. A backward bent wrist is very difficult to work with and can be pretty painful. And then of course, just by getting closer and then levering and pressing down, it becomes relatively easy to pin the opponent with then a top roll. So now that we know those two common techniques and their advantages, we can begin to look into how to train each of those techniques. So just for general arm wrestling training, the easiest and simplest exercise is, of course, just a simple bicep curl. A method that then works for both types of arm wrestling training is the hammer curl, where you have the wrist in a neutral position. What that does is it not only engages the biceps, but also engages the brachialis along the side of the arm. The biceps are great when your hand or your palm is facing towards you, whereas the brachialis takes more and more role as your hand turns further and further away from you. Where when your palm is completely away, it's almost just brachialis. So then by doing a hammer curl, you can work on the biceps and the brachialis with high efficiency. Then when it comes to the more specific movements of each, for the hook, the main thing is to develop wrist strength curling inward, which you can either do in the air like this, or you can set your arm over a table or over your leg, and then do simple wrist curls that way. That is a great way to develop strength and durability in the wrist without compromising any other lift. Because you could also do, if you had a barbell, you could do barbell rows with bent wrists, or you could do pull-ups with bent wrists. Those work as well, but they decrease the effectiveness of the lift for the other muscle groups you're using. So a simple wrist curl is best. Another thing that is then good for top roll, you can use either a belt, or here I have a strap for a bag that I don't use. You can wrap it around the dumbbell to where you know that the dumbbell won't fall out. Grab a hold of the strap, and then similar positioning as you would with the wrist curl, except now you simply will rotate your wrist to the side, moving it from palm facing you to palm facing away from you. Doing that works the pronator muscle in the forearm, which is the key muscle for the top roll. Then just another thing that you can do for arm wrestling in general, in order to keep a hold on your opponent's hand, which if you ever watch professional arm wrestling recordings or matches, you notice that it's not rare for their hands to completely slip off of each other. So then just by training your grip strength, you can help counter that. Here I have a grip trainer that has a curved handle and one that is just straight handles. The one with the curved handle, I would recommend for arm wrestling training at least, to actually put the curved side over the palm, so that then, when it's fully extended, your fingers are still bent. The idea of this is that you will get mostly the flexion at the base knuckle engaged, and not so much the pinching of the fingers. This is mainly because pinching of the fingers is never used in an arm wrestling match. This is worthless. That's only for rock climbing or powerlifting, but not arm wrestling. So then by making sure that the resting position is bent, they can make sure that it'll be most efficient in which muscles you use. Then for the straight handles, it's as simple as just shifting it, instead of it being high on the hand, shifting it to being low on the hand. And then those are probably the best ways to go about training for arm wrestling. With all this information, anyone can be ready to begin arm wrestling either for fun or for sport. Today I discussed the most common injury in arm wrestling and how to prevent it, the two most common arm wrestling techniques, and I have demonstrated and explained the most optimal training methods for these techniques. Hopefully you have learned something from this presentation, and maybe you'll even be able to beat your friends now in casual competition. Thank you for listening to my speech.